My stepmother screamed, "Get this stinking old man out of here now, I can't stand you two anymore." My stepbrother threw me and my sick father out into the snow. They thought we had nowhere left to go. But 1 week later, their entire reality would shatter. I am Agnes Holt, 29 years old, and I will never forget that frozen night in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. The temperature had plummeted to a brutal -15 degrees Celsius as a severe blizzard roared outside our family estate. My father was gasping for air, suffering from a severe acute bronchospasm, yet my stepmother showed zero mercy, violently throwing his vital oxygen machine directly onto the deep snowbank. Before I could even react, my stepbrother grabbed my arm and forcefully shoved us both out onto the icy porch, slamming the heavy oak door. The lock clicked with terrifying finality. I was completely trapped in sub-zero winds, desperately shielding my trembling father with my own body. They thought they had successfully discarded an impoverished designer, especially since my stepbrother had secretly frozen our bank accounts 2 days prior, leaving me with exactly $12 in my personal savings. But they had absolutely no idea about the massive digital storm that was already brewing on my laptop. Before we find out how my father and I survived that frozen nightmare and turn the tables, please hit like and subscribe to support our journey of justice. A pair of blinding halogen headlights sliced through the heavy, swirling snowdrifts just as my father's breathing turned into a desperate, hollow rattle. The massive black pickup truck aggressively crunched through the mounting ice until it skidded to a sudden halt directly in front of our frozen curb. Before the engine even cut off, the heavy driver's side door swung wide open and a tall, broad-shouldered man rushed out into the sub-zero storm. It was my cousin Norman Holt, a 35-year-old credit risk analyst at a major commercial bank in Sioux Falls, who happened to be driving back from a late shift downtown. His jaw dropped in pure, unadulterated horror as he took in the sight of me kneeling on the frozen concrete, desperately shielding my fading father from the biting winds. Without asking a single unnecessary question or wasting time on useless panicking, Norman instantly stripped off his thick down overcoat and draped it over my shivering shoulders. With his immense physical strength, he gently but swiftly gathered my unconscious father into his powerful arms and rushed toward the idling vehicle. He commanded me to climb into the front passenger seat immediately, and the sudden, intense blast of the cabin heater hit my numb skin like a physical shockwave. Norman carefully laid Dad across the spacious rear seats, adjusting the coat to trap the remaining warmth before throwing the truck into reverse and peeling away from the dark, silent neighborhood. The heavy tires spun against the black ice, but Norman masterfully regained control, keeping his eyes locked onto the treacherous, snow-covered roads ahead. I explained through violently chattering teeth that the local public hospital was currently facing catastrophic delays due to the blizzard emergencies, so Norman made an executive decision. He steered the truck away from the city center, navigating through the blinding whiteout conditions until we reached an exclusive private respiratory clinic located in a quiet medical district. Norman knew the head chief of medicine there, ensuring we would bypass the chaotic public waiting rooms entirely where my father's compromised lungs could catch secondary infections. The sterile warmth of the private clinic rushed over us as the medical staff instantly mobilized, wheeling Dad directly into a specialized intensive resuscitation bay. A stern-faced administrative coordinator immediately intercepted us at the high marble reception counter, sliding a multi-page financial intake document across the surface with an air of practiced professional neutrality. She informed us that because our primary family insurance policy had been abruptly flagged as restricted by the primary holder, a substantial cash deposit was required to secure the private isolation wing. Without a single second of hesitation or legal questioning, Norman reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a sleek, heavy titanium credit card. He smoothly swiped the card and signed the authorization forms, willingly taking on an immediate emergency debt of $9,000 for a relative who was not even his immediate parental responsibility. My pride burned like acid as I stood there watching his incredible generosity forced into absolute silence by the ironclad non-disclosure agreement of my pending tech acquisition. While the medical team worked efficiently to stabilize my father's oxygen levels behind the frosted glass doors, I retreated to a quiet corner of the sterile waiting lounge. I pulled my battered heavy laptop from the bottom of my bag, bypassed the standard public internet connection, and launched a multi-layered virtual private network. My fingers flew across the keyboard in a rapid, flawless rhythm as I entered the secure two-factor authentication codes for my encrypted wealth management portal. The screen loaded instantly, illuminating my exhausted face with the harsh digital glare of a high-priority message from a prominent corporate law firm downtown. The subject line read, "Final escrow handover approval," confirming that the extensive legal audits and cryptographic verifications for my proprietary database framework were complete. The massive corporate buyer, a global investment conglomerate owned by the notorious billionaire Marcus Caldwell, had officially locked in the wire transfer. The mandatory 7-day holding clearing period was now actively ticking down hour by hour, meaning that exactly 1 week from now, a highly liquid $15 million would land directly into my private, unshared corporate account. The high-pitched rhythmic hum of my father's nebulizer machine was the only sound that kept me anchored in the cold reality of the clinic room. As I sat watching the steady rise and fall of his chest under the pristine hospital sheets, my phone vibrated with an encrypted alert from Norman. He had bypassed the standard security protocols to pull a fresh, compressed video file directly from the estate's cloud server. My hands shook slightly as I downloaded the digital footage, revealing a wide-angle view of the expansive front foyer of our family home. The timestamp indicated it was exactly 9 o'clock on the morning after we were thrown out into the sub-zero blizzard. Clayton was confidently guiding a young woman through the grand entrance, presenting the house with an inflated sense of ownership. It was Stacy Caldwell, the wealthy 28-year-old heiress to a major real estate investment fund, who had recently accepted his engagement ring. I watched in absolute disgust as Clayton wrapped a possessive arm around her waist, gesturing toward the architectural sketches my father had painstakingly designed years ago. The secondary audio track from the internal intercom system kicked in with crystal clarity, capturing Clayton's smooth voice as he spun a web of malicious lies. He explained that his stepfather had suffered a catastrophic mental breakdown due to severe dementia, losing all cognitive awareness and wandering off into the freezing night out of pure delusion. Stacy gasped softly, pressing a manicured hand to her lips while expressing deep sympathy for Clayton's manufactured burden. He smoothly assured her that he was now the sole responsible adult managing the family estate, promising that they would seamlessly renovate the master suite once the legal transfer of ownership was finalized. The sheer calculation behind his performance turned my remaining grief into a lethal, focused rage, realizing they had orchestrated our destruction to impress a billionaire's daughter. Later that same afternoon, the quiet sanctuary of the recovery room was abruptly shattered when the heavy wooden door was slammed open without warning. Helen marched into the private wing with a look of theatrical, aristocratic outrage, accompanied by 2 armed county deputies and a stern-faced, middle-aged woman clutching a legal clipboard. It was Agent Cooper, a senior caseworker with Adult Protective Services, who had been dispatched on an emergency report regarding elder endangerment. Helen immediately pointed a trembling, manicured finger at me, launching into a well-rehearsed crying performance for the benefit of the authorities. She loudly claimed that I was an unstable, unemployed vagrant who had actively kidnapped a vulnerable, medically compromised senior citizen from his primary residence to extort the family for thousands of dollars. Helen demanded that the deputies arrest me for child and elder endangerment, immediately pointing to my oversized borrowed sweatshirt as proof of my absolute financial instability. I did not scream, nor did I allow a single tear of defensive panic to compromise my position before the interrogating officials. I slowly stood up from the vinyl chair, squaring my shoulders and pulling a sleek leather folder directly from my laptop bag with absolute corporate precision. Agent Cooper stepped forward to hand me a temporary protective removal order, but I smoothly intercepted the paperwork, refusing to look intimidated by their presence. I opened the folder to present the original notarized copies of my father's comprehensive estate planning documents, which included an ironclad durable power of attorney and a medical collateral directive. I spoke with the icy authority of a seasoned professional, stating clearly that under Section 34 of the South Dakota Elder Protection Act, a unilateral removal without a prior judicial warrant is strictly prohibited when the dependent is under the active care of licensed medical staff in a private facility. I showed them the official laboratory results proving Dad was being treated for severe acute bronchospasm caused by chemical and environmental exposure, highlighting that he was perfectly safe. The two deputies exchanged uncomfortable glances, quickly realizing that Helen's frantic affidavit was directly contradicted by legally binding medical records and authorized signatures. Agent Cooper meticulously reviewed the signatures on the financial directives, comparing the dates to ensure they were executed over a year ago when my father possessed full cognitive capacity. Realizing that I had boxed them into a legal corner, the caseworker slowly lowered her pen and informed Helen that the statutory threshold for an emergency state intervention was absolutely not met. Helen let out an indignant shriek of protest, but the deputies simply turned on their heels, refusing to participate in a civil property dispute under the guise of an emergency welfare check. By Tuesday afternoon, the biting chill of the South Dakota air seemed to match the cold, calculating fury that governed my every move. I stepped into the polished, quiet lobby of the private respiratory clinic, heading toward the specialized pharmacy counter to collect the expensive broad-spectrum liquid antibiotics prescribed for my father. While waiting near the glass display cases, a sharp, patronizing voice cut through the soft background music, making me turn around instantly. It was Stacy, draped in an opulent white cashmere coat holding several designer boutique bags, who was browsing the luxury skincare section. Her eyes narrowed with immediate aristocratic disdain as she recognized my borrowed winter jacket and the exhaustion written across my face. She walked over with a slow, deliberate stride, her high heels clicking sharply against the marble floor as she prepared to humiliate me. Stacy let out a cold, mocking laugh, looking at me like I was an unpleasant stain on her perfect, wealthy horizon. She sneered that she was completely disgusted by my pathetic attempts to cling to Clayton's family, accusing me of being a lazy, unemployed parasite. She claimed that I was deliberately keeping my father hostage in this private clinic just to elicit cheap emotional sympathy and extort financial handouts from her hardworking fiancé. According to Stacy, Clayton was a brilliant self-made real estate investor who was tired of being dragged down by my endless financial failures and dramatic lies. She demanded that I sign over the remaining guardianship papers, immediately warning me that her family's immense legal resources would bury me in court if I tried to interfere with their upcoming wedding plans. I stood my ground, my posture perfectly relaxed, and my face wiped completely clean of any defensive anger, letting her spit out her arrogant delusions without interruption. Before she could finish her patronizing rant, a calm, commanding voice broke the tension as Norman stepped smoothly into the pharmacy aisle. He did not look angry, but his eyes carried the lethal authority of a senior credit risk analyst who spent his life dissecting arrogant white-collar criminals. Norman politely stepped between us, completely ignoring Stacy's defensive gasp, and pulled a thick, professional folder bearing the official red seals of his commercial banking firm. He opened the document package, sliding a series of highlighted ledger sheets and certified credit reports directly over the pharmacy counter right in front of her eyes. Norman stated with icy precision that Clayton was not a wealthy real estate tycoon, but rather a completely insolvent debtor who is currently facing multiple frozen credit lines. He turned the pages to show the official bank origination signatures proving Clayton had secretly forged Helen's name to drain exactly $300,000 from her personal retirement accounts. Stacy's confident smirk completely faltered as she stared at the undeniable financial evidence, her hands beginning to tremble against her expensive designer shopping bags. Norman ruthlessly pointed to the secondary transactions showing that Clayton had also taken out an illegal, highly leveraged mortgage on my father's ancestral home without his knowledge. He had funneled those stolen funds into secondary shell accounts to buy the flashy sports car and the diamond engagement ring Stacy was currently wearing, desperate to pretend he belonged in her elite social circle. Norman explained that Clayton was a financial predator who was preying her family's massive wealth would automatically wipe out his impending ruin once they legally tied the knot. Stacy choked on her breath, shaking her head in frantic denial as the manufactured illusion of her perfect fiancé began to shatter before her. She desperately claimed Clayton would explain everything, clutching the certified banking documents to her chest as she quickly rushed out of the clinic to confront him directly. The digital chime of my laptop screen illuminated the dark, quiet hospital room at exactly midnight on Thursday. A brilliant flash of green text materialized across the encrypted balance portal, officially displaying a successful settlement notification that made my racing pulse stabilize instantly. The proprietary geographic information system framework I had spent countless lonely nights programming was no longer just a locked piece of intellectual property. The corporate buyer had formally authorized the final release from their institutional escrow account, transferring exactly $15 million directly into my secure federal business repository. I stared at the long line of zeros reflecting in the dark glass window pane, realizing that the artificial poverty my former family had forced upon me had vanished forever. I was no longer a broke freelancer standing helpless in a sub-zero storm, but a highly liquid corporate partner holding more immediate capital than my abusers would ever touch. As I silently closed the encrypted screen, Norman walked into the room with a grave expression, holding a fresh notification from a private secondary lending agency downtown. He explained that Clayton's fraudulent transactions had finally triggered a catastrophic financial emergency for the residents of our family home. The private lending firm was preparing to initiate an expedited judicial foreclosure on our ancestral estate by Monday morning because the secondary mortgage Clayton had taken out had officially fallen into severe default for over 3 full months. Clayton had completely stopped making the substantial interest payments, leaving the property highly vulnerable to immediate public liquidation. Norman calculated that the foreclosure notice would be served within 48 hours, meaning that Helen and her precious son were completely unaware that the roof over their heads was about to vanish. Instead of showing panic, a cold, predatory smile spread across my face as I recognized the absolute tactical perfection of the timing. I immediately used my laptop to contact my private corporate attorneys, authorizing them to establish a completely anonymous blind trust under a designated corporate proxy. I instructed the legal team to leverage my newly settled funds to purchase the defaulted mortgage contract directly from the lending agency using an all-cash offer. My lawyers worked rapidly through the night, paying whatever premium was required to expedite the immediate transfer of the financial note and the legal deed before the close of business. By the time dawn broke over the city, the transaction was legally complete, officially making me the sole underlying creditor of the property. I now owned every single brick, every architectural pillar, and every square foot of the land, giving me the absolute legal authority to execute an eviction whenever I chose. As I was reviewing the newly signed deed documents, a generic email notification popped up on my personal inbox, radiating pure arrogance from the glowing interface. It was a lavishly animated digital invitation featuring silver scrolling calligraphy over a background of pristine marble, formally announcing the grand engagement gala of Clayton and Stacy. The celebration was scheduled for Saturday evening in the prestigious Grand Ballroom of the luxurious Plaza Hotel, promising an ultra-exclusive gathering for Chicago's most prominent corporate elites. Clayton had spent the final thousands of dollars he had embezzled from Helen's retirement reserves to finance imported caviar, a private orchestra, and bottomless top-tier champagne. He genuinely believed that this six-figure gala would cement his social status, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire empire had already been purchased out from under his feet. I closed the invitation with a quiet, icy determination, ready to let him put on his custom tuxedo and make his arrogant toasts before I dropped an atomic bomb on his reality. Friday morning arrived with an unforgiving gray sky that hung low over the municipal courthouse of Sioux Falls. Inside the chilly wood-paneled walls of Courtroom 3, the low drone of the ventilation system added to the heavy atmosphere, as the emergency conservatorship hearing was officially called to order. Clayton and Helen marched inside with absolute confidence, radiating an aura of untouchable arrogance, while being flanked by a prominent, high-priced family litigator named Sterling Hayes. They had orchestrated this emergency petition behind our backs, desperately seeking to establish permanent state-sanctioned guardianship over my father to seize absolute control of his architectural assets. Clayton sat at the petitioner's table wearing a sharp designer suit looking appropriately solemn for the cameras, while occasionally pretending to wipe away non-existent tears of filial worry. Sterling Hayes did not waste a single second surging to his feet to launch a vicious, calculated character assassination against my capability as a daughter. He paced the courtroom floor aggressively brandishing a heavily highlighted document before marching directly toward the elevated bench to hand it to the magistrate. It was a printed copy of my old personal retail bank statement that Clayton had illegally extracted from our shared family files just 3 days ago. The high-priced attorney boomed that the court was dealing with an unemployed, financially destitute freelancer who possessed a pathetic balance of exactly $12. He argued that it was a case of imminent danger, claiming I lacked the basic disposable income to afford appropriate medical housing or professional specialized nursing care for a severely compromised senior citizen. Helen nodded vigorously from the front gallery row, clutching an expensive silk handkerchief to her eyes to finish the elaborate performance of maternal distress. My hands remained folded neatly on the defense table as I absorbed their malicious perjury, without displaying a single ounce of the emotional panic they expected. I did not object, because the trap was perfectly set, and I needed Clayton to firmly lock himself into his fraudulent narrative before I delivered the counterstrike. Once their aggressive presentation concluded, I stood up smoothly, adjusting my tailored blazer and requested to call my sole expert witness to the stand. It was Norman who bypassed the petitioner's table with a mask of absolute professional detachment, carrying the massive, terrifyingly thick folder of financial evidence. He took the oath before Judge Caldwell, a non-nonsense magistrate with sharp eyes who presided over the county's probate and estate division. Norman stated with unwavering authority that he was a licensed credit risk analyst, and his comprehensive forensic audit proved Clayton was completely insolvent. He effortlessly submitted a mountain of certified banking logs directly to the bench, bypassing the furious shouted objections of Sterling Hayes with practiced ease. Norman methodically narrated the paper trail for the official court record, exposing that Clayton had forged my father's signature on a highly leveraged secondary mortgage contract. He explained that Clayton had liquidated $300,000 from Helen's retirement reserves, funneling the stolen cash into dummy accounts to purchase luxury vehicles and fake a billionaire lifestyle to secure a wealthy marriage. The high-priced litigator stood frozen as he realized his client had provided completely falsified asset sheets, prompting him to frantically request to withdraw as counsel for the petitioner. The temperature in the courtroom plummeted to 0 as Judge Caldwell meticulously reviewed the certified bank routing numbers and the blatant forgery reports. She removed her reading glasses, locking her gaze onto Clayton, with a look of such profound, unadulterated disgust that he visibly shrank into his heavy leather chair. The magistrate announced that the emergency petition for temporary guardianship was immediately and permanently dismissed, retaining my full unrestricted physical and legal authority over my father. Furthermore, based on the severe financial irregularities and systemic elder exploitation presented today, Judge Caldwell issued an immediate asset freeze on Clayton's personal and Shell bank accounts. She formally ordered the entire forensic folder to be transferred directly to the county district attorney's office for immediate criminal prosecution regarding grand larceny wire fraud and severe elder financial abuse. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a glittering, suffocating sea of white orchids and stolen luxury on Saturday night. Clayton was standing confidently on the raised central stage, tapping his microphone with an arrogant, self-satisfied grin as he prepared to address the wealthy crowd. He began delivering a pompous speech about generational legacy, looking directly at Stacy and her father who were standing near the front reserve liquor bar. Before Clayton could raise his crystal champagne flute for a celebratory toast, the heavy mahogany double doors at the back of the room were violently thrust open. I stepped over the threshold wearing an immaculate floor-length designer gown of deep midnight silk, radiating an icy, calm presence that immediately silenced the entire room. Flanking me on either side was Marcus, the self-made billionaire tech CEO, who walked with a heavy, purposeful stride that commanded absolute authority. The elite crowd of Sioux Falls power brokers instinctively parted for us, as Marcus walked straight past the trembling Clayton to seize the microphone. Marcus announced to the stunned audience that tonight was no longer a celebration of marriage, but rather a formal introduction of his newest executive partner. He declared that my revolutionary geographic compliance database had just been officially acquired for a $15 million buyout, making me the largest individual shareholder in his primary corporate division. Before Clayton could even process the crushing news, I stepped forward and placed Norman's certified forensic audit and the court's official asset freeze order directly onto the white linen table. Stacy snatched the documents, her eyes darting frantically over the default notices, proving the expensive diamond ring on her finger was paid for with stolen retirement funds. Realizing the horrific scale of his deception, Stacy gasped in revulsion, tore the ring off her finger and threw it directly at Clayton's face before recoiling in disgust. Marcus did not show any mercy, instantly signaling his private security team to swerve and pin Clayton to the polished floor as the county deputies marched inside to arrest him for federal wire fraud. I turned away from the chaotic scene and walked directly toward Helen, who was slumped deeply in a nearby velvet armchair, her face a pale waxen mask of pure terror. I calmly reached into my leather folder and dropped the expedited foreclosure deed and the legal eviction notice directly onto her lap. I whispered with an icy calm precision that because I had purchased their defaulted mortgage through a blind trust, I was now the sole owner of our family estate. I gave her exactly 2 hours to pack a single suitcase and vacate my property, promising to have the police drag her out onto the freezing South Dakota streets just like her son. 2 years have passed since that spectacular absolute implosion, and the grand ancestral estate has finally been gutted of their toxic, shadowed existence. Clayton is currently serving a mandatory 8-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary in South Dakota, reduced to wearing a faded orange jumpsuit and mopping cold concrete floors. Helen's descent was equally absolute, living entirely bankrupt and isolated in a decaying, cramped motel room on the industrial outskirts of the city. Because she had foolishly co-signed Clayton's fraudulent banking contracts, the relentless collection agencies successfully seized her remaining assets, leaving her completely destitute. Miles away from that squalor, my father has recovered his physical health, and we now live in a bright, warm home, filled with natural light, thriving happily with Norman's loyal companionship. This journey has taught us that true family is never defined by shared biological coincidence, but rather by active choices of protection, respect, and unwavering support during our darkest blizzards. I am deeply grateful to each of you for staying with me until the very end of this story, as your presence means the world to our channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments below about whether you believe justice was truly served, and let me know how you would have handled such a betrayal.